Of course, we have to start our first live show a little bit slow, a little bit late. What's amazing is working with Facebook these days has changed, getting a stream to work properly. So technically, something is showing on Facebook, but it's not what I would have expected. Um, so, Andrew, tell me, tell me about working with Facebook. I know you don't do a lot of live streams, but tell me what your experience has been with working with Facebook recently.
Facebook, I use Facebook primarily for publishing, static content. And they changed and they've been changing rapidly in the past, I would say 2 to 3 months, but they change frequently. You get into a routine for how you're going to produce content or push content and how you're going to manage groups or pages. And then they change everything up on you. And every time they do it, it becomes more cumbersome in three ways, even if they give you one little advantage in one way.
So, my issue is I use it about 3 times a week. I stream a couple of different shows. I use it 3 times a week. And I promise you, it is never the same. Right now, if you go to Facebook, what you see, and I'm using vMix, I've been using vMix now for wow, since 2020. Been using vMix. So you set up the same the getting your stream key in there, making sure this one time I had it where it didn't come up live. You had to go put live, but that's usually just a checkbox. But in this instant, what happened is it's trying to use the local camera instead of using the vmix stream to it. So now I can fix it.
Mm.
I would have to stop the stream here, change the settings here, then go back, but then that'll ruin the rest of the show. So I won't complain too much about it. So this is the first time in a long time we're doing SpaceAge Live. We collaborate a lot, our two companies, Brainwave as well as SpaceAge. We do a lot of collaboration. Usually, I'm doing the audio visual with the hands on networking, and you're doing networking, network security, and remote management. So go ahead and briefly tell us, as I try to fix this in the background because it's annoying me, briefly tell us some of the things that you working on, especially as we're turning into 2023 soon. We're turning into 2024 soon. And, so just give a brief outlay on what you've been working on and then some of the things you'd like to work on in the future.
Okay, cool. I have been getting my organization shifted over towards managed services as a primary service offering. And when we say managed services, we typically in the cybersecurity IT operations space, we typically look at our interaction with customers in two ways. One is what we would call break fix and projects, and the other is what we would call managed services. In break fix, basically we you call us when there's an issue, or if we happen to be monitoring some high level stuff and we notice a problem, then we'll come in and take care of that problem based on time and materials. Whereas managed services is you're paying a subscription based pricing to cover a series of remote management of desktops, servers, networking devices, with the idea being that we stay on top of things and don't let them blow up, right? Because in the break fix arena, things can go well for a while, then all of a sudden there's a problem. I'm called in, I troubleshoot, and once I troubleshoot and figure it out, then we decide what the next step is going to be. So that's not it's good for me in certain ways. Sometimes it can be a scheduling problem if multiple customers call up with that. But overall, managed services is better for everyone. It streamlines the revenue, and but it also keeps the overall cost down for the customers, and they get more consistent operation for their business. And so we're doing a lot of that. We're making that shift with our customers, and bringing on some new customers that will appreciate the managed service model more than just the up down feast famine model.
So now I got to go apologize to Facebook because, well, it looks like it's working properly, even though it showed up not working. Anyway, it wasn't user error because I set everything up right, but the page I was looking at was just a blank page that said connect your camera to it. So, and when I refreshed and went back to my homepage, I can see that we're streaming on Facebook as well as YouTube. So there is that. Um, yeah, so thank you for the overview on your system. What we're going to talk about in these shows is like a melding of AV and video and IT security and things of that nature. And since we're coming down to the tail end of the year, one of the things I wanted to talk about was sort of refocusing for next year. And you mentioned that refocusing for next year, maybe sort of forecasting. Usually I'm doing hardware reviews, going over different configuration, different setups. At coming to this end of the year, I've been working with a couple of clients, and for me to sell a client on a product, I like to get my hands on it and test it. It's not the cheapest way to do things, but at least then I'm well aware of what the product can do and how we can best implement it for them. So that's why I like to do hardware reviews, get my hands on a lot of different pieces of equipment, and then be able to utilize it for next year. We have had a lot of requests for managed services.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of equipment do you look at when it comes time for managed services? When you're thinking about a client, and typically our clients are small businesses, houses of worship. We have done a couple of mid-sized businesses, but what sort of when your client comes to you, they give you an outlay. How do you decide what equipment they should get?
So that's a good question. I would answer it this way. Historically, because of my corporate background, I've touched a lot of different pieces of equipment over time, and and to some degree, I'm hardware agnostic to some degree, but that's lessening more and more. And I'll tell you why. It's not so much a vendor incentive kind of a thing. The issue is this: in order to be proficient, you see how you spoke about testing equipment and being knowing how it's going to work for an environment. In order to be effective for customers, there has to be some level of standardization. You don't want to be locked in too tightly to any single vendor, because then you don't have enough price flexibility. If they start going wrong in their if their strategy for their vision and their strategy is kind of not aligned with what you want to do, then you have to kind of go back and change out all of what you've invested in up to that point. So I like to keep two vendors or so for each class of product that we're looking at. But I tailor based on our testing. I kind of pick vendors that I feel are going to be able to offer the things for the size and scope of the particular customers we have. And that's basically what we look at. What are the customers trying to accomplish, and what size budget do they have? What tier do they want to put themselves in terms of equipment?
So, one of the things that we talk about when we have, when you talk about vendor agnosticism, trying to come up with a new word for it. One of the things that all these flipping backgrounds, I'm going to have to fix that. Everything has a different background. But one of the things that we talk about is with everything going to cloud management,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you are forced to group in your equipment together. Let's say, for instance, on in my realm, churches, because of the price point, you end up purchasing a lot of Black Magic equipment. Yes, it sounds funny to say a church is buying Black Magic, but the idea is just BMD, Black Magic Design, makes very good hardware, and they're getting a lot better than they used to be. Sometimes you had a lot of QA issues um, with the first batch. They're getting a lot better, but their equipment for the functionality and the price point, you just can't match it. Now, if you're talking about a high stress level, high one of the studios I work in, they're not going to buy those. They're going to stick with Ross and some of the higher quality pieces of equipment. AJA, some people pronounce it Aja, some people say AJA. You're going to deal with those companies because they're more robust. They're at a higher price point.
Hmm.
So, for instance, there's three different lines of equipment that we work with, um, and they're each on a different price tier.
Hmm.
So, even when you want to be agnostic, how do you determine which price tier you're going to go after?
Right. So the idea is, what is the value proposition for the customer? Okay. There are times when you look at the different models that you're talking about, there are times when a particular vendor has a full suite of products that can cover all of the bases, right? They have a firewall, they have switches, they have wireless access points. But their access points may be good and their switches may be good and the firewalls not so much. Then you have another vendor that's really strong in the firewalls. And then you have another vendor that's pretty good throughout, but has better access management. Well, it all depends on what your value proposition is going to be to them. If you have a customer that's going to have a lot of equipment, they're going to end up with, they have multiple office instances, office locations, and they're going to end up with two or three pieces of equipment in each of those locations. Then the management of that becomes more important. The ability to manage it, right? So the 10% variance in the quality of the flexibility of the tool, it stops being as important as, can I quickly manage, assess, monitor this environment, right? Because otherwise, then the value proposition is not as good. You're not able to track them effectively. You're not able to upgrade them, to manage them, to make changes effectively. The other thing is, if a vendor, if a particular customer needs a certain type of network protection, then that's what you'll focus on. That's the thing that's going to be big for them. I have customers that have 5, 6 offices and tunnels between all of those offices, right? And there needs to be flexibility of what can access what. Getting a tool that solves that problem, that's going to dictate what the overall solution is going to be for them, right? So it's a matter of mapping out what is it that the customer actually needs, where are they likely to grow, and then you try and hit that in one shot rather than putting them in a whole ecosystem, and then a year and a half later, the first time they do an upgrade, now it's like, oh no, you can't ride the tricycle anymore. I've got to get you a bicycle.
So on that note, how do you determine? There's so many vendors out there. I mean, look at the
Hmm.
switch market. Um, Within this house alone, I have a Netgear switch, an Arachnus switch, a Package Edge switch, a Pack Edge switch, Ingenious switch, some no-name brand switches. Um, how do you get to evaluate what's going to work? What is the least expensive way to evaluate what's going to work? I know I have my method. I love trade shows. Love trade
Right.
shows. So oftentimes I will go on a trade show just so I can get a better experience with the client, just so I can get a better experience with the equipment, just so I can get some hands-on. I can speak to the vendors. I can um, really touch the product. I was able to do that with a console recently. But now, when I go to install it, I have a little bit more familiarity, but I still like
Hmm.
to be able to touch them. I get to see the UI, I get to see how to solve specific problems. My other method is to just continue to buy all these things, and then after I get familiar with them, I can sell them secondhand to somebody. So, what's your methodology of of doing? of getting familiar with these other products?
I used to do the trade show thing a lot. Not so much now. I used to do the trade show thing. In an enterprise capacity, I had the opportunity to bring vendors in and do pilot testing. All right. So I would do that. I'd find out something and say, "Oh wow, this technology seems pretty cool. It looks like it's very useful." A customer requests something specific that's not what I'm doing, or I come across something through colleagues and friends. Somebody posts something on their page on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and they say, "Hey, this I'm really getting good mileage out of X." And then I look at it and I say, "Oh, this might be interesting," and I ask for a proof of concept. I get a demo scheduled with the vendor, and I ask for a proof of concept and use it for a while and ship it back. Now, having said that, over time, I've done less and less of that, right? Because my overall strategy is essentially this. I figure out where I need to be. Like for instance, I went after Fortinet because they added tremendous value at the firewall level. And even though they have accumulated more, they've accumulated switches and other stuff, their value proposition to me is at the firewall level. And so I get them for firewalls. I'm not going to look at anyone else for firewalls until something is inadequate with them. And the way that came about a couple of years ago is I was looking at Ingenious for switches. I had outgrown some of my switches. I had Netgear and some other things, and the Ingenious switches added a value for me. And when I looked at it, I said, okay, this is a value proposition. It works for me, it works for the customer. And I started to roll with it. And so now what that means is on the switch side, I'm not changing that unless something fails in this value proposition. I'm not touching that, right? And so I've got the firewalls and I've got the switches. I spoke to the Ingenious folks because I talk to all my vendors and stay in the loop with them. And I spoke to them and said, hey, if you guys were to offer a firewall and it was capable enough, there's some people that have basic firewall needs that would be better for me to use them here, and that would be worth it. And it turns out that they were working on that in the background and they have since released that. So now that's an option for me. Using that firewall from them is an option for me for a price sensitive customer, right? So I've got the foremost powerful, flexible tool here. But if I get a price sensitive customer and I've got to make this whole package work and still give them good, robust edge of the network management, now I have an option that's within my trusted realm.
And on the flip side of that, I remember a job that we did where we went with a trusted vendor, but in area, an arena, a section that they don't
Mm,
normally do. And it was a horrifyingly bad experience because
hmm.
we trusted the vendor based on previous equipment,
Right,
but the whole thing was, it was built with the idea that you're going to build it within their entire ecosystem, and
right,
it just didn't fit. It didn't fit at
right.
all. So there is that lesson to learn, that just because company A is good with widgets doesn't mean they're going to be good with gizmos. It's just the
And
way of the world.
no, and that's important. And that's why when this opportunity came and they said, hey, we are releasing this, I said, well, I'll be interested to test it. They sent me a couple to test, and I've been giving them feedback the whole time because those devices are great. They not only are they good for the price point, they're good from a simplicity standpoint, but you must hit those metrics square because they're limited, right? In keeping everything nice and boxed up, they're limited. And so we won't be surprised if we have to do a deployment of that because we already know what those limitations are going in
Right.
because we had the opportunity to test it, unlike that other scenario. But that's what we learn from those experiences and make adjustments to our strategy.
Yeah, and on the AV side, there have been a couple of companies I've reached out to for demos, and some have been able to provide. Some, all I did was end up becoming signing up with their network, so at least I can get their products a little bit less expensive. But in terms of knowing how to install these things, knowing how to deploy them, knowing what is a good price point, what do you look at first? Do you look at their budget first, or do you look at their need first?
Well, so part of the discussion that I had about moving to managed services means that although I am tailoring, customers can feel confident that when they say, "Hey, I have this problem," that I'm going to assess the solution and provide them with an answer. But I'm also balancing that against the need to standardize it, right? Because it doesn't make sense for me to give them a completely customized solution on the front end that becomes a pain and an expense to manage and monitor on the back end or subsequent to that. So I have established tiers. I've been doing this long enough that I know that customers and companies fall into certain bands of technology. And so I give them tiers. So it may be that a customer comes and says, "Oh, here are my needs." And I say, "Well, I know that you said your needs are at 8.5, but you really should just go to 10 and pick, and we'll give you the 10 solution, right? Rather than the 5 solution, because we have a 5 tier and a 10 tier, and the 5 tier would be better for you price wise, but you would grow out of it quickly, and then you'd be annoyed that you couldn't recoup the losses on that equipment that was there. So let's just go to the 10 tier. You're going to spend a little bit more to get into it, but you have almost infinite growth from that point in terms of your size." And so the idea is not to say that there's no customization and I'm just putting people into bands, but the customization is tempered by standardization. So there's some flexibility. When you go to fast food place, right? You get to pick small, medium, large. You don't get to pick, "Hey, I'd like 4.7 ounces of of liquid." No, it's
That's
not
true.
that flexible. You go into tiers, right? And your kids meal or a regular meal, you go into tiers, and we try and encourage you in which tier makes more sense for you. So that's a similar way to how I look at the technology, and I pre-compute some of that stuff in advance, because again, it helps the customer benefits when you put them in a good placing, where they can maximize the value of that particular ecosystem. Because if they were to go strictly on price, if I were to take their word on price every single time as the final arbiter, it would imply that they understood the value of technology costs, and they don't.
Yep. So we're going to go to a new segment. Let's see if I can get this set up properly. We're going to go to a new segment
Hmm.
called Breaking News.
Okay.
So the key to breaking news is what is going on right now that you can take a couple of minutes to talk about breaking news. And as always, we have crypto as an issue. We always have security, even though I haven't heard about too many breaches lately. And the question I would have is that because they've become so commonplace that we're not talking about them, or is it they're just not happening? Okay. So we have crypto in your world, cryptos, breaches, and then patches. What do you want to cover in 2 minutes?
So let's look at some patches. Oh yeah, let's talk about patches. What do you want to talk about patches?
So we've come across some interesting software recently for managing
Mm.
patches, and if I was prepared, I would have had the websites to them. I mean, I could put them in. Hang on, let's go to my number one go to right now is let's bring it up here. Vmix, I love it. They've made some updates, and it's just so easy to. Okay, let's do this. Para! Here we go.
Hmm.
We're gonna cut this in here. Action one. It's something that I've signed up for. This is not a sponsored call. We're just talking about patch management. I use them. They don't give me any kickbacks. But Action One is action1.com. They're really good at managing multiple computers. They do use an agent to install an agent on the PC. So this is what I've been using recently for patch management. What about you? Do you have one you want to talk about?
I have been using Action One as well. Great for patch management, and I think it's even simpler than Datto RMM, which is a really robust remote management tool. But when you hear robust in technology circles, if it's dealing with hardware, it's solid stuff. It's complete. It's comprehensive. If you're dealing with software, it's cumbersome. It's flexible, used more as a pejorative than as a, as a than as a compliment, and it is yeah, you if you have to do Datto RMM without Datto space RMM, and you'll see it come up from either Kaseya's link or Datto's link.
Oh, vmix doesn't quite work that well. Hang on a second.
Oh, I won't do the search. Okay.
I need the actual link. It doesn't do a search.
Okay,
Dado
gotcha,
RMM.
gotcha.
That can be found at.
Kaseya,
Aha. Oh no, the first link on YouTube takes you somewhere
hmm
else.
right?
Not on YouTube, on search. No, it's actually Dado.com.
Yeah, and then the RMM comes out behind it, right?
Right.
Datto, a
So
Kaseya company.
let's just throw that up real quick. Yes, Datto, Datto. I have deployed a couple of those agents as well as a test. It's a
Hmm
bit. I actually like them both,
hmm
but I've gotten more familiar with using Action One.
Action One is a patch management solution that has added some remote management capabilities.
Right.
Um, Datto RMM is a remote management tool, and it's a massive one.
Mm,
And
okay.
so it is more cumbersome to do patch management in Datto's tool than in Action One, as an
Right,
example.
right, right. And I've been using
Right?
it more for patch management, especially for remote clients. I have a client that's 2 hours away, and I wish I had known about Action One or even Datto prior to doing that
Day
whole
one.
setup.
Hmm
Sometimes it's easier to just be able to fix the client's problem rather than having to try to talk them through it. Um,
Right.
so on the AV side, oh wait, we only have a
hmm
few minutes left. On the AV side, one of the new things is remote. So PTZ cameras are now in the tracking world. Everybody's releasing them. PTZ Optics, BZB Gear, Canon, all of them are releasing um, cameras that can track you. Sony, Panasonic. Oh, I don't know if JVC does it yet. I have never used a JVC PTZ camera, but the tracking, it makes certain things easier, especially if you have multiple cameras. You can set one to track and have the other cameras do different shots. In our case, our main camera, this is what we have as camera two, it's what gets the wide shot of the stage for our church. It does not have the tracking feature, and I wish we had bought it because sometimes after you've been TDing for an hour, you just want to set the thing on remote, especially for some speakers who run around the stage a lot. You just want to set it on remote and sit back for a few minutes. So that is my breaking news of the day. We hope to bring something different each and every week, just for short segments. So, do you have any closing thoughts?
I think as we wind up the year and we go into the new year, I think that people need to understand that we're entering, just like how the pandemic has moved from the whole hype of COVID and everything related, and we're moving into a steady state of dealing with COVID. I think we need to look at security like that. Past 2 or 3 years, especially in conjunction with the pandemic, there was this massive focus on security, but people are waning now and going back to what it was. And the bad guys are amassing more money and continuing to do attacks. So we need to continue to be vigilant. You don't have to be hyper vigilant, but continue to look for stuff and stay on top of things because people are going to target your business.
And my final word is thank you for watching us. as we're going to do this often. We haven't figured out exactly a time, a date, but just keep your eye out. We'll try to plan it at least a couple of days in advance so you can get it on your calendar, and you could always just watch the replays. If you have any questions, any equipment you'd like us to cover, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. We'll start putting some contact information up here if you have questions about network. I always go the wrong direction. If you have questions about IT and security, you can speak to Andrew. You can reach out at Brainwave Consulting. If you have AV questions, you can reach out to me at SpaceAge Consulting. And thanks for watching. And we'll get more guests on as time goes by, and our topics will expand. Y'all have a great night. All right, how do I want to close this now? Where's my. I forgot to put a slate button in. See? How are you going to close out your show without a slate button? Good grief.